Chapter 5. Do we have what H.G. Wells called an invisible government? As I've previously related, the modern science of making public opinion through advanced techniques of manipulating mass opinion began at one of the West's most advanced propaganda factory, situated in Britain, at Wellington House. This facility, dedicated to social engineering and creating public opinion at the commencement of World War I, was under the aegis of Lords Rothermere and Northcliffe, and the future Director of Studies at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Arnold Toynbee. Wellington House had an American section whose most prominent members were Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. As we discovered later, Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, a fact carefully hidden from public view. Jointly, they centered work on techniques to mobilize support for World War I among the masses who were opposed to war with Germany. The public perception was that Germany was a friend of the British people, not an enemy, and the British people saw no need to fight Germany. After all, was it not true that Queen Victoria was the cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm II? Toynbee, Lippmann, and Bernays worked to persuade them that war was necessary, using the techniques of the new science through its new arts of mass manipulation via the communications media for its propaganda purposes, tinged with willingness to lie, which was just getting into its stride, having learned a great deal of experience during the Anglo-Boer War, 1899-1902. It was not only the British public whose perception of events had to be altered, but also a recalcitrant American public. To this end, Bernays and Lippmann were instrumental in getting Woodrow Wilson to establish the Creel Committee, which created the first body of methodological techniques for dissemination of successful propaganda and for the science of polling to secure the correct opinion. From the beginning, the techniques were designed in such a way that polling, public opinion making, was based on one obvious but striking feature. It was concerned with people's opinions, not with their understanding of the processes of science. Thus, by intent, the pollsters elevated an essentially irrational element of mind to a primary level of public focus. This was a conscious decision to undermine the grasps of reality that masses of people in an increasingly complex This was a conscious decision to undermine the grasps of reality of masses of people in an increasingly complex industrial society. If you ever watched Fox News, where viewers are given the results of a poll about, quote, what Americans are thinking, unquote, and then for the next hour found yourself shaking your head and wondering what the results of the poll reflected about your own thinking process, then you could only have felt more puzzled than ever. The key to understanding Fox News and the poll might lie in what Lippmann had to say about such matters. In his 1922 book, Public Opinion, Lippmann outlined Tavistock's psychological warfare methodology. In an introductory chapter, The World Outside and the Pictures in Our Heads, Lippmann stressed, quote, that the object of study of the public opinion social analyst is reality, as defined by internal perception or images of that reality. Public opinion deals with indirect, unseen, and puzzling facts, and there's nothing obvious about them. The situations to which public opinions refer are known only as opinions. The pictures inside our heads, inside the heads of these human beings, the pictures of themselves, of others, of their needs, purposes, and relationships, are their public opinions. Those pictures, which are acted upon by groups of people or by individuals acting in the name of the groups, are public opinion with capital letters. The picture inside so often misleads men in their dealings with the world outside. From this evaluation, it is easy to take the next decisive step made by Bernays, that the elites who run society can and do marshal the resources of mass communications to mobilize and alter the herd mind. 1 year after Littman's book, Bernays authored Crystallizing Public Opinion. He followed that in 1928 with a book entitled quite simply Propaganda. In the first chapter, Organizing Chaos, Bernays wrote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men that we have never heard of. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. Whatever attitude one chooses to take toward this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires, which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world." In Propaganda, Bernays followed his praise of the invisible government by underscoring the next phase that propaganda techniques would follow. As civilization has become more complex, and as the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated, the technical means have been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented. With the printing press and the newspaper, the telephone, telegraph, radio, and airplanes, ideas can spread rapidly and even instantaneously over the whole of America. To back up his point, Bernays quoted the mentor of public opinion manipulation, H.G. Wells. He cited a 1928 article in the New York Times in which Wells welcomed modern means of communication for opening up a new world of political processes and for allowing the common design to be documented and sustained against perversion and betrayal. For Wells, the advent of mass communication leading up to television meant fantastic new paths for social control beyond the wildest dreams of the earlier mass manipulation fanatics of the British Fabian Society. We shall return to this vitally important subject later herein. Chapter 6, Mass Communications Ushers in the Polling Industry. For Bernays, his recognition of Wells's idea won him a key place in the hierarchy of U.S. public opinion controllers. In 1929, he won a position at CBS, which had recently been taken over by William Paley. By the same token, the advent of mass communications ushered in the polling sampling industry to organize the perceptions of the masses for the media mafia, part of the invisible government running the show from behind the scenes. From 1935 to 36, polling was in full swing. In the same year, Elmo Roper began his Fortune magazine 4 surveys, which evolved into his What People Are Thinking column for the New York Herald Tribune. George Gallup initiated the American Institute of Public Opinion In 1936, he opened up the British Institute of Public Opinion. Gallup was to headquarter his activities around Princeton University, intermeshing with the Office of Public Opinion Research / Institute for International Socialist Research / Psychology Department complex, run by Hadley Cantrell, who was destined to play an increasingly important role in developing the psychological profiling methods later to be used in manufacturing the Aquarian conspiracy. In the same 1935-1936 period, the first time use was made of polling in presidential elections under the impetus of two newspapers owned by the Cowles family, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune and the Des Moines Register. The Cowles are still in the news business. Based in Spokane, Washington, they are active opinion makers, and their opinion and their support of the Bush war in Iraq was a crucial factor. It is not certain who introduced the practice of advisors to the president, those persons who were not elected by the citizens and whom they have no opportunity to vet, but who decided the internal and external foreign policies of the nation. Woodrow Wilson was the first American president to make use of the practice. Opinion research in World War II. These were all small lead-ups to the next phase, triggered by two important intersecting developments: the arrival of émigré psychological warfare expert Kurt Lewin in Iowa, and the involvement of the United States in World War II. World War II provided the emerging Tavistock social sciences scientists with enormous scope for experimentation. Lewin's leadership put together the key force that would deploy after World War II to utilize those techniques developed in warfare against the population of the United States. In fact, in 1946, Tavistock declared war on the civilian population of the United States and has remained in a state of war ever since. The basic conceptions expounded by Lewin, Wells, Bernays, and Lippmann remained in place as the guideposts for manipulation of public opinion. The war gave the social scientists the opportunity to apply them in highly concentrated form and to bring together a large number of institutions under their direction to further the ends of their experiments. The core institute, which was the vehicle for making public opinion, was the Committee on National Morale, ostensibly established to mobilize support for the war, in much as President Wilson had set up his management committee to manage World War I. Its real purpose was to carry out the extensive profiling of both the Axis and American populations for the purposes of creating and maintaining a means of social control. The committee was headed by several leaders of American society, including Robert P. Bass, Herbert Bayard Swope, among other notables. Its secretary was Margaret Mead's husband, Gregory Bateson, one of the principal instigators of the CIA's notorious MK-Ultra LSD experiments that some experts consider as the launch vehicle for the U.S. counterculture of drugs, rock, and sex. The committee's board of trustees included poll taker George Gallup, intelligence agent Ladislav Farago, and Tavistock psychologist Gardner Murphy. The committee ran a number of special projects, the most important being a major study of how best to wage psychological warfare on Germany. The key personnel critical to the development of the public opinion project were Kurt K. Lewin, education and history, psychology, social sciences; Professor Gordon W. Allport, psychology; Professor Edward G. Boren, psychology; Professor Hadley Cantrell, psychology; Ronald Lippett, Social Sciences, Margaret Mead, Anthropology, Social Sciences, Youth and Child Development. The staff numbered more than 100 researchers who comprised the staff of the committee and several opinion profiling institutions critical to the subject. One such a special project team was in the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the forerunner of CIA, composed of Margaret Mead, Kurt Lewin, Ronald Lippett, Dorwin Cartwright, John K. French, and public opinion makers like Samuel Stouffer, later chairman of the Laboratory Social Relations Group at Harvard University, Paul Lazarsfeld of Columbia University's Sociology Department, who developed with profiler Harold Laswell an opinion research methodology for the OSS based on detailed content analysis of the local press of enemy countries, and Francis Lickert, a Prudential insurance company key executive immediately before the war, had perfected profiling techniques as the director of research for Life Insurance Agency Management Association. This equipped him to interact favorably with the head of the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, who was the former head of Prudential Life Insurance Company. Lickert served as director of the Division of Morale of the Strategic Bombing Survey from 1945 to 1946, from which position he had enormous scope for mass public profiling, opinion profiling, and manipulation. Chapter 7, The Making of Public Opinion. According to Tavistock Institute records, the Strategic Bombing Survey played a key role in forcing Germany to its knees through a highly disciplined program of systematic bombing of German worker housing, which Sir Arthur Harris of the RAF was only too delighted to carry out. In addition, from 1939 to 1945, Lickert ran the Division of Program Surveys of the Department of Agriculture, from which major studies were undertaken in the techniques of mass persuasion, or to put it another way, making public opinion to fit the desired goals. One can only speculate on the numbers of citizens who believed their support for the Allied war effort sprang from their own opinions. One of Lickert's key aides in the division was Lewin protege and future Tavistock operative Dorwin Cartwright, who wrote the textbook document titled Some Principles of Mass Persuasion, which is still in use today. Another major agency for shaping public opinion was the Office of War Information, directed by Gardner Cowles for much of the war effort. Bernays was brought into OWI as an advisor. It is out of the nexus we have described here that the network of key polling institutions emerged after World War II. They have played a powerful and decisive role in American life ever since. Gallup, from the Committee on National Morale's Board of Trustees, upgraded his activity and became the key commander of polling institutions for launching new policies of the Committee of 300, which he passed off as polling results. Bernays played several key post-war roles. In 1953, he wrote a paper for the State Department that recommended setting up a psychological warfare office by state. In 1954, he was a consultant to the U.S. Air Force, the armed forces branch most under the influence of the Strategic Bombing Survey people. During the 1950s, during this early 1950s period, Bernays was Public Relations Counsel to the United Brands Corporation, one of the leading corporations in the communication/national security apparat, Eisenhower's military-industrial complex, then busy with consolidating its power over U.S. policy. Bernays conducted the propaganda campaign alleging Guatemala was falling under communist control that resulted in a U.S.-engineered coup in that country. In 1955, Bernays wrote a book about his experience titled The Engineering of Consent. The book became the virtual Tavistock blueprint followed by the U.S. government to overthrow any country whose policies were unacceptable to the one-world government socialist dictatorship. Throughout the post-war period, Bernays was a member of the Society for Applied Anthropology, one of Margaret Mead's social control institutions inside the U.S., and the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, a group created by John Rawlings Rees, a founding member of Tavistock, to run psychiatric shock troops among the American population. One of its first actions was the unlashing of homosexuality in Florida, a move bitterly opposed by Anita Bryant, who had no idea of what she was up against. The second of its actions was to introduce the theme that non-white people are more intelligent than whites, which we shall discuss later. Lickert moved to the University of Michigan to set up the Institute for Social Research that absorbed the Massachusetts Center for the Study of Group Dynamics, the principal Tavistock affiliate in the U.S. in the beginning of the post-war era. Tavistock's ISR was the center of a number of critical profiling and opinion research subgroups. Among them, the Center for Research in the Utilization of Scientific Knowledge was established by Lickert OSS co-worker and Lewin disciples Ronald Lippett. Project director Donald Michael was a leading player in the Club of Rome, and second subgroup, the Survey Research Center, was Lickert's own personal creation that grew to become the most elaborate institution in the U.S. for surveying, creating, popular attitudes and trends, among the principal of which were demeaning and degrading womanhood and pushing the superior intellectual capabilities of non-white persons according to Lewin's carefully crafted scripts. Robert Hutchins became famous during this period, and his closest colleague in those early years was William Benton, the founder in 1929 with Chester Bowles of Benton and Bowles, the well-known advertising firm. Benton utilized Benton and Bowles as a means to develop the science of mass control through advertising. It was Benton's pioneering work, supported by Douglas Cater, that led to the development of Tavistock's burgeoning control over U.S. media policy through the Aspen Institute of Colorado, the American home of the socialist one-world government Committee of 300. In passing, I mentioned that the science of mass media control through advertising is today so firmly entrenched that it has become the key component in opinion making. In the early post-World War II days, Hollywood incorporated it into nearly all of its movies. Advertising, brainwashing, has done through the type and make Advertising, brainwashing, was done through the type and make of car the car the hero drove, the brand of cigarettes the suave Lawrence Harvey smoked, the clothes and makeup the leading lady wore, clothes that became more risque with every passing year, until today, in 2005, we have womanhood degraded by the likes of Britney Spears' almost naked breasts and bare stomach exposed by crotch-hugging jeans she often wears, the social mores that Hollywood enjoys so much in flouting. Okay.